The surface of my life was flawless. To anyone looking in, I was Sophia Sterling, wife of the celebrated architect. Richard Sterling, mistress of a stunning glass and steel house that had been featured in 3 different magazines. I was the woman who hosted perfect dinner parties, who chaired charity committees, and who always wore the right dress. My life was a meticulously curated exhibition, and Richard was the curator. He had designed the house, chosen the furniture, and subtly, over 15 years of marriage, sculpted me into the perfect, elegant accessory for the life he wanted to lead. But in the dark, quiet corners of my existence, I had my own private collection. It wasn't a collection of art or jewelry. It was a bank account. A secret account at a small, online-only bank under my maiden name. It had no paper trail, no statements mailed to the house. It was a digital ghost, a silent testament to a truth Richard could never know. That my life with him was a beautiful cage, and this account was the key to a door he didn't even know existed. I called it my F******* fund. It was the only thing in my life that was truly, completely mine. Richard wasn't physically cruel. His weapon was control and his ammunition was money. He was the provider, a fact he never let me forget. All our assets were in his name. He gave me an allowance on a credit card he monitored daily, and every purchase was subject to his scrutiny. A dress he deemed too frivolous would be met with a raised eyebrow and a comment about fiscal responsibility. A lunch with a friend he didn't like would prompt a discussion about our budget. He had chipped away at my financial autonomy so slowly, so methodically, that I hadn't even realized I was a prisoner until the walls were already built. The beginning of the end started with a baby shower. My younger sister, Chloe, was having her first child, and I had bought her a top-of-the-line stroller, the one she'd dreamed of but couldn't afford. It was expensive. I had used the joint credit card. It was a deliberate act of defiance, a small rebellion. Richard saw the charge that evening. He didn't yell. Yelling was messy, uncivilized. He simply summoned me to his study, the room where he made his grand pronouncements. "Sophia," he said, his voice calm and patronizing. He gestured to the credit card statement on his massive screen. $700 for a stroller. Isn't that a bit excessive for a family that can barely manage their own rent? It was a gift for my sister, I said, my voice tight. I wanted to get her something special. What's special is living within one's means, he said, turning to look at me, his eyes cold. Your sister's financial irresponsibility is not our burden to bear. This reckless spending has to stop, Sophia. It's becoming a problem. He let the words hang in the air, a threat veiled as concern. A problem. I was the problem. My small act of generosity was a problem. I just nodded, the familiar knot of resentment tightening in my stomach. I didn't argue. I hadn't argued in years. But as I walked out of his study, I made a silent promise to myself. The problem wasn't my spending. The problem was my silence. And it was about to become his problem too. The stage for my public execution was set at Betrayal, a restaurant so exclusive and expensive that its name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. We were there for a business dinner with a potential client, a Japanese tech mogul named Mr. Tanaka. His company was looking to build a new North American headquarters. Landing the contract would make Richard's career. The pressure was immense. I played my part perfectly. I was the charming, elegant wife. I wore a simple black dress that Richard had approved of. I made polite conversation about art and travel. I laughed at Richard's jokes. I was a ghost in my own life, a beautiful automaton programmed for social graces. Mr. Tanaka was a quiet, observant man. He spoke more to me than he did to Richard, asking about my interests. I told him about my painting, a hobby I pursued in the small sunroom Richard had designated my creative space. Ah, you are an artist, Mr. Tanaka said, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. My wife is a collector. She has a great passion for portraiture. Richard laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. Sophia is being modest. She has a cute little hobby. She paints people's pets, dogs mostly. He said it with a smile, but the subtext was clear. It's not real art. It's not important. I saw a flicker of something in Mr. Tanaka's eyes, but he just nodded politely. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but I kept the serene smile pasted on my face. The dinner was a success. The deal seemed all but certain. As the waiter cleared the dessert plates, Richard, flushed with wine and victory, turned to me with a magnanimous gesture. "Darling," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "why don't you give this last round of drinks a little celebration?" He was giving me permission to spend money, a public display of his generosity. The bill for the drinks arrived. It was over $300. I pulled the joint credit card, the one he managed, from my purse and handed it to the waiter. Richard was beaming, regaling Mr. Tanaka with a story about a building he had designed. The waiter returned a few minutes later and leaned down to whisper to me. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he murmured, his face a mask of professional discretion. "This card has been declined." The blood drained from my face. I could feel Richard's eyes on me, cold and hard. This was not an accident. This was a message. "Try this one," I said, my voice barely a whisper, handing him the personal card Richard gave me my allowance on. I knew it wouldn't work. The allowance was a pittance, and I had already used most of it. The waiter tried it. He returned, his expression even more pained. "My apologies, ma'am. That one as well." The silence at the table was deafening. Mr. Tanaka looked down at his water glass, a picture of politeness. Richard's face was a mask of triumph. He had done this. He had done this. On purpose. Here, in front of his most important client, he had chosen to publicly neuter me to show everyone who held the power, who controlled the money. He expected me to be flustered, humiliated, to turn to him for rescue, but he didn't know about my secret collection. I took a slow, deep breath. I reached into my purse, into a small, hidden pocket sewn into the lining. My fingers closed around a cool, slim piece of plastic. It was a sleek black card with no name on it, only a number and the logo of a bank he had never heard of. I pulled it out and placed it calmly on the small silver tray. My hands were not shaking. "I apologize for the confusion," I said, my voice clear and steady, my eyes meeting Richard's. "Please try this one. There shouldn't be a problem with it." The waiter took the card. Richard stared at me, his triumphant smirk frozen. On his face, slowly melting into a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He didn't know what he was looking at. It was an anomaly, a piece of data that did not compute in the perfect, controlled world he had constructed. A minute later, the waiter returned, a fresh receipt in his hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling," he said with a nod. I signed the slip, added a generous tip, and placed the black card back in its secret home. Mr. Tanaka looked at me, and for the first time that evening, he smiled. A genuine, appreciative smile. "You handle yourself with great poise, Mrs. Sterling," he said. I inclined my head. "It's a necessary skill," I replied, my gaze still locked on my husband's stunned face. The war had just begun, and I had fired the first silent, devastating shot. The car ride home was a symphony of silence. A thick, vibrating, malevolent silence. Richard drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead into the darkness, his jaw clenched. I sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the blurred city lights, my heart beating a steady, defiant rhythm. The shock on his face at the restaurant had been more satisfying than 1,000 angry words. He waited until the garage door was closed, until the engine was off, until we were sealed in the concrete tomb of our perfect house. Then he turned to me, his face a thunderous mask. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice low and shaking with rage. "That was me paying for the drinks," I said calmly. "With what?" he demanded. "What was that card?" "Where did you get it?" I unbuckled my seatbelt. "I have my own resources, Richard," I said, my voice cool. I opened the car door. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't you walk away from me. I am your husband. I have a right to know where that money came from. Are you hiding money from me?" The hypocrisy of it was breathtaking. He, the man who controlled every penny, who monitored every transaction, was accusing me of financial infidelity. I pulled my arm from his grasp. "You canceled my credit cards, Richard," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "You did it deliberately to humiliate me? Did you really think I had no other way to exist? That I am so completely dependent on you that I couldn't even buy a round of drinks without your permission? This is not about permission," he roared, finally losing his carefully maintained composure. "This is about our finances, our life. We are a partnership. Partners don't have secret bank accounts." I almost laughed. Partnership. He wouldn't know a partnership if it came with a blueprint. "We can talk about this in the morning," I said, and this time I did walk away. I walked into the house, up the floating staircase he was so proud of, and into the master bedroom. I closed the door, but I didn't lock it. I wanted him to know I wasn't scared of him anymore. The Cold War began that night. He slept in the guest room. For the next week, he alternated between icy silence and furious interrogations. He demanded to see my bank statements, my computer, my phone. I refused. He accused me of having an affair, of having a secret lover who was funding me. The idea that I could have my own money, earned by my own merits, was so foreign to him that it simply wasn't a possibility in his mind. He thought he could break me. He thought he could bully me into confessing the source of my sudden, mysterious independence. But he didn't understand. The secret account wasn't just money, it was a 15-year project. It was an armor I had been building around my soul, piece by piece, for years. And he was not going to pierce it. He had no idea the power I held. He thought he was the curator of my life. He was about to find out that I was the one who owned the entire secret collection. And the museum was about to close. That the F***** fund was born a decade ago on a Tuesday. I remember the day with perfect clarity. I had just bought a set of expensive oil paints and canvases, a splurge after selling a small painting at a local art fair. I was so proud. Richard came home, saw the receipt on the kitchen counter, and launched into a calm, cutting lecture about frivolous hobbies and wasting money that could be better invested. He made me return them. I drove back to the art supply store, my face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a fever, and got a refund. That night, I sat in my creative space and looked at my empty easel. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if I didn't do something, he would slowly, methodically erase every part of me that wasn't directly useful to him. So I opened the account. It took an entire afternoon of careful research to find the right bank, one with robust online security and no physical branches that might send mail to the house. I funded it with the $200 in cash I'd gotten from the art fair. It was a tiny seed of rebellion, and then I started to water it. My pet portraits, the cute little hobby Richard so openly disdained, became my secret enterprise. It started with friends. a portrait of a beloved golden retriever for a birthday gift, a painting of a grumpy-looking cat for a Christmas present. They paid me in cash, or sometimes they'd buy me an expensive gift of art supplies that I would then return for cash. It was a clandestine operation conducted in whispers in coffee shops. Then my friends' friends started calling, and their friends. I built a quiet word-of-mouth reputation. I created a simple, anonymous website under a pseudonym, The Painted Paw, showcasing a gallery of my work. Clients would contact me through an encrypted email address. I would paint their pets from photographs. They would pay me via PayPal or Venmo directly into my secret account. For 10 years, I had nurtured this fund. Every portrait of a pampered poodle or a scruffy terrier was another brick in the wall of my independence. While Richard was busy building his architectural empire, I was quietly building my own. He thought my art was a joke, but my little joke had grown into a fund of over $80,000. It was my armor, my escape hatch, my declaration of self-worth. Now, in the cold war of our marriage, he was trying desperately to find the source of my power. He started organizing my art studio, rummaging through my supplies, looking for receipts or records. He would casually ask questions about my friends, trying to see if I was selling paintings to them. He was an architect, used to seeing the structural supports of a building. He could not comprehend that the foundations of my new strength were completely invisible to him. His inability to find the source of my independence was driving him mad. His control was slipping, and he didn't know why. One evening, he confronted me, his face pale with a rage that was starting to border on desperation. "I'm cutting you off, Sophia," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I'm closing all the joint accounts. I'm canceling your allowance. You want to be independent? Fine. Let's see how long you last. Let's see what your resources can do when you have to pay for groceries, when you have to put gas in the car." He expected me to beg, to cry, to finally break down and confess everything. He thought he was cornering me, starving me out. I just looked at him, my expression calm. "All right, Richard," I said. He stared at me, dumbfounded by my lack of reaction. He couldn't understand it. He had taken away all my visible means of support. He had locked all the doors he knew about. He didn't realize I had my own key, and I was about to walk out of his prison forever. The day after Richard cut me off, I made a phone call. Not to him, or to my parents, or to a sympathetic friend. I called a lawyer. Her name was Eleanor Vance, a name I had gotten from a woman in my secret network of pet portrait clients. She was known for being a shark, a specialist in high-asset divorces, and, more importantly, in cases involving financial abuse. We met in her discreet, elegant office downtown. Eleanor was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. She listened to my story without interruption, her face a mask of professional neutrality. I told her everything. The 15 years of control, the allowance, the monitoring of my spending, the public humiliation at the restaurant, and finally, the existence of the F*******U fund. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Sterling sounds like a classic financial narcissist," she said, her voice calm and analytical. "He uses money to control, to punish, and to maintain a sense of superiority. The fact that you have managed to build a substantial safety net under these conditions is, frankly, remarkable." "He thinks he starved me out," I said. "He thinks I'll come crawling back in a week. And will you?" Eleanor asked, her eyes searching mine. "No," I said, the words solid and sure. "I wanted to file for divorce." A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. "Good," she said. "Because with what you've told me and the records you've kept, we are not just going to file for divorce. We are going to dismantle him." The next week was a whirlwind of strategic planning. Following Eleanor's advice, I started making moves. I used my secret black card to put a deposit on a small, sunny apartment in a different part of town. I arranged for movers. I systematically documented Richard's controlling behaviors, going back through years of emails and text messages where he belittled my hobby or questioned my spending. I was building a case just as I had built my fund, quietly, methodically, and with devastating precision. And then something wonderful happened. Monsieur Tanaka, the Japanese client from that fateful dinner, contacted me. He didn't call Richard. He emailed me directly through the anonymous Painted Paw website, which he had found after a bit of clever searching. His email was polite and direct. He expressed his admiration for my poise at the dinner and his interest in my work. He said his wife was an avid equestrian and had 2 prized horses she adored. He wanted to know if I would be willing to accept a commission to paint them. It would be a large-scale diptych, a significant and challenging work. The fee he offered was staggering. It was more than my entire annual allowance from Richard. It was more than just a commission. It was a validation. It was a signal from the world that my art, my cute little hobby, had real value. It was a lifeline from the very man Richard had tried to use as a stage for my humiliation. The irony was so beautiful, so perfect. It was almost poetic. I accepted the commission immediately. I booked a flight to his estate in Kyoto for the following month to photograph the horses. I paid for the ticket with my black card. The day I moved out of the house, Richard was at work. I didn't leave a note. I just let the movers pack up my clothes, my art supplies, and the few personal belongings that truly felt like mine. As I stood in the doorway of that vast, empty glass house for the last time, I felt a profound sense of release. It had been a beautiful museum, but I was tired of being an exhibit. The divorce papers were served to Richard at his office the next day. I could only imagine the look on his face. The shock, the fury, the utter disbelief that his perfect, controllable wife had not only left him, but had done it with a power and independence he couldn't comprehend. He had built a cage for me, but he'd forgotten that I was an artist. And artists always know how to find the hidden colors, the secret doors, the way out. The news of my departure and the divorce filing sent a shockwave through Richard's carefully ordered world. He did not react with sadness or remorse. He reacted with narcissistic rage. His first legal move was an attempt to freeze my assets. All of them. He filed an emergency motion claiming I had hidden marital property, that my secret account was a fraudulent scheme to steal from our shared wealth. He's trying to reestablish control, Eleanor said calmly when she called to inform me. He can't control you emotionally anymore, so he's using the courts to try and control you financially. It's a classic desperate move. Can he do it? I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. We're not going to let him, Eleanor replied, her voice like steel. We are going to respond with a narrative of our own. And ours has the benefit of being the truth. Our counterfiling was a masterpiece. It didn't just deny his claims. It systematically dismantled his entire premise. We presented a detailed history of his financial control, using his own emails and text messages as exhibits. We included a sworn affidavit from me, explaining that the secret account was not an act of fraud, but an act of self-preservation, a safety fund created in direct response to years of economic abuse. We argued that the money in the account was generated solely by my own artistic endeavors which Richard himself had consistently belittled and dismissed as a non-contributing hobby. The legal battle was ugly. It dragged on for months. Richard's strategy was to bleed me dry, to make the process so expensive and so painful that I would give up and crawl back to him. But he was fighting a war on 2 fronts, and he was losing on both. The first front was the court. His claims of hidden marital assets began to look less like illegitimate grievance and more like the angry accusations of a spurned, controlling husband. The second front was social, and it was a battle he was even less prepared for. Views of our separation spread through our social circle, and the story was not the one Richard had tried to spin. Mr. Tanaka, delighted with the preliminary sketches for his portraits, became a vocal champion of my work. He introduced me to his wife, who in turn introduced me to her circle of wealthy, art-loving friends. My cute little hobby exploded into a legitimate, high-demand business. The feature piece on the art blog about my unique style of animal portraiture went viral in elite circles. I was suddenly getting commissions from CEOs, from celebrities, from old money, families on the East Coast. My waiting list was 6 months long. My income from the painted paw now dwarfed the allowance Richard had once doled out to me. The ultimate humiliation for him came when the architectural firm that was building the new wing of the city's art museum, project Richard had desperately wanted but lost to a rival, contacted me. They wanted to commission a series of large-scale paintings for the new donor lounge. I was no longer Sophia Sterling, the architect's wife. I was Sophia Hayes, the artist. My identity, which he had tried so hard to curate and control, was now being defined on my own terms by my own talent. The pressure on Richard was mounting. His professional image, which he prized above all else, was taking a hit. He was no longer seen as the powerful, benevolent provider. He was seen as the fool who had let a brilliant artist slip through his fingers, the man who couldn't even keep his own perfect house in order. His cage was shrinking, and he was the one trapped inside. The day of our settlement conference was gray and rainy, a perfect backdrop for the end of a marriage. We met in a neutral conference room, halfway between my new art studio and his gleaming office tower. The air was thick with unspoken resentment. Richard looked tired. The confident, commanding architect had been replaced by a man with shadows under his eyes. His expensive suit seemed to hang on him. The war had taken its toll. He had thrown everything he had at me: legal motions, social pressure, financial intimidation, and nothing had worked. I was still standing. In fact, I was thriving. He came in with one last desperate gambit. His lawyer argued that my art business, now incredibly successful, had been built during the marriage. Therefore, he was entitled to half of its value. Eleanor was prepared. She smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "That's a fascinating argument," she said, opening a file. "Let's explore it. For years, your client actively dismissed Miss Hayes's work as a worthless hobby. We have emails, texts, and we are prepared to call witnesses who will testify to the fact that he not only offered no support, financial or otherwise, but actively discouraged her." She leaned forward. "In fact, one could argue that this business only became successful after Miss Hayes was free from the oppressive and controlling environment of your client's home. Its success is not a marital asset. It is a direct result of the dissolution of the marriage. To claim half of it now is not just legally tenuous. It is profoundly insulting. And I can assure you, a judge will see it the same way." She let that sink in. The threat was clear. If he pushed this, we would take it to open court. We would put his controlling behavior, his financial abuse, his years of belittling me on public display. We would dismantle his reputation. Brick by brick. Richard stared at me across the polished table. I saw a flicker of the old rage in his eyes, the fury of a man who has lost control. But beneath it, there was something else: defeat. He was a builder, an architect. He knew when a structure was fundamentally unsound. In his case, his marriage, his entire world of control, that was collapsing. He looked at his lawyer and gave a short, sharp nod. That was it, the white flag. The rest was a formality. They conceded. I would keep my business, my art, and every penny in the F asterisk 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 U fund, which was no longer a secret fund, but simply my business account. The house, which he loved more than he had ever loved me, would be sold, the proceeds split. The divorce would be clean and final. As we signed the final papers, my hand was steady. I felt no joy, no triumph, just a profound, quiet, and weary sense of relief. The exhibition was over. The doors to the museum were closing. When it was all done, he stood up to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at me. "You know," he said, his voice quiet and hollow, "I never understood the painting. I never understood why you spent so much time on it." "I know," I said. That was the tragedy of it all. He had never seen me. He had only ever seen a reflection of himself, an accessory to his own life. He had never once looked at my canvases and seen the talent, the passion, the secret language I had been speaking all along. He hadn't seen the brushstrokes that were building my escape. He walked out of the room and out of my life. The rain was still falling outside. It felt like the world was being washed clean, washed past. The divorce was finalized. The house was sold. My old life was packed away into boxes and archived in the past. My new life was a ride of color and controlled chaos. I moved into a loft apartment in the Arts District, a space with high ceilings and huge, north-facing windows that flooded the room with perfect, gentle light. The main room was my studio, canvases leaning against the walls, the smell of turpentine and oil paint, a constant, comforting perfume. My apartment was smaller than the glass house, but it was more full. It was full of me. My business thrived. The Painted Paw was no longer an anonymous website. It was a sought-after brand. I hired an assistant to manage my commissions and a business manager to handle the finances. I was not just an artist anymore. I was a business owner, an entrepreneur. The commission for Mr. Tanaka's horses was a turning point. I spent a week at his breathtaking estate in Kyoto, sketching the magnificent animals, capturing their spirit and power. The final paintings were the best work I had ever done. They were huge, dynamic, and full of a life that had been absent from my earlier, more constrained work. Mr. Tanaka was so thrilled he became my greatest patron, introducing me to an international circle of collectors. One evening, I was preparing for my first solo gallery show. The gallery was a prestigious space downtown, the kind of place I had once walked past with Richard, never dreaming my own work would hang on its walls. The show was titled Portraits, and it featured not just my animal paintings, but a new series of works. Secret portraits of people, anonymous, candid shots I had taken over the years, capturing moments of quiet vulnerability. As I was arranging the final pieces with the gallery owner, I saw my reflection in the large plate glass window. I was wearing paint-splattered jeans and a simple t-shirt. My hair was tied up in a messy bun. My hands were stained with cadmium red and ultramarine blue. I looked nothing like the polished, perfect Sophia Sterling who hosted dinner parties. I looked like myself. The opening night was a blur. The gallery was packed with people. Friends, clients, collectors, critics. I saw Mr. Tanaka and his wife smiling at me from across the room. I saw my sister Chloe, her baby now a toddler on her hip, her eyes shining with pride. Even Eleanor, my shark of a lawyer, was there, looking surprisingly emotional. Every single painting sold. Late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, I stood in the center of the gallery, a glass of champagne in my hand. A critic from a major art journal came over to me. "Your work is extraordinary, Miss Hayes," he said. "There's a fierce sense of life in it, a kind of reclaimed freedom. It's as if your subjects are finally being truly seen." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I looked around the room. at the canvases that were a testament to my secret life, the life that had saved me. Richard had thought my art was a hobby, a cute, worthless pastime. But he was wrong. It was never a hobby. It was a rehearsal, a long, patient 10-year rehearsal for the moment I would finally be ready to paint my own life in my own colors, on my own terms. And as I looked at my reflection in the window one last time, I knew with every fiber of my being that I was finally a masterpiece of my own making.